In the summer of 2023, there was a drought in Kansas. But Jim Tucker's family had weathered worse. Jim's great-grandfather had first settled here as a homesteader not long before the Dust Bowl era in the 1930s. A tall, affable man, Jim still farms the family plot today. It's home, and he loves it.
You know, we're in the southwest corner of Kansas, very rural area, and you can see for miles in every direction.
Miles out, across fields of wheat, corn, and sorghum, and up into a night sky unspoiled by city lights.
The stars are just fascinating here, and often, you know, on a clear night, you can see planes twinkling across the skyline in different directions. That's comforting to be here in the middle of nowhere. You feel safe, you feel isolated from the rest of the world. And so when there's major conflict, you know, with wars or something, oftentimes people will say, there's no place I'd rather be than Morton County, Kansas, because we're so far removed from it. When 9/11 happened, I remember thinking one night as I was outside, it was very humbling because there were no planes in the sky.
Rural Kansas might feel far from the wide world, but sometimes the world comes to Kansas. And a couple of summers ago, it came to a community bank in Morton County's largest town of Elkhart.
So I first learned there was an issue at the bank on the 5th of July of 2023.
Elkhart only has a couple of thousand residents. Big banks generally don't open branches in places so small. So back in the 80s, Jim's dad helped set up a bank for the town. Heartland Tri-State Bank grew into a trusted lender to local farmers. But now, something was up.
I had a person reach out to me that had a bank employee reach out to them about concerns at the bank. But it was very vague. It didn't have a lot of information, just that there was something at the bank that didn't seem right.
Jim was on the board of the bank. He convened with his fellow directors, but not at the bank. Everyone in Elkhart knows everyone else's car. To see the whole board turn up for an unscheduled huddle might cause a panic. So they met out of town in an office on Jim's farm.
The idea was just to meet somewhere discreet, confidentially, and try to sort out what was going on.
What they discovered was that money was missing from the bank. On May 30th, just over a month prior, $1.5 million had been discreetly transferred to a cryptocurrency exchange called Kraken. The next day, another $1.5 million followed it. Then there were more transfers over the weeks that followed, some as large as $10 million. In total, $47.1 million had vanished. That was around a third of the bank's total assets and more than all of its capital.
Phone calls were made and had with about every abbreviated agency you can think of. Several hours, days, nights, sitting right here at this table, trying to sort it out.
One thing was clear. The money wasn't stolen from Heartland Tri-State Bank. It was wired out by the bank's own CEO, Shane Haynes. It didn't make sense. Shane had run the bank successfully for 12 years.
It shook everybody.
Jim's dad, Bill Tucker, was chair of the board.
We was happy with Shane. We thought he was a dandy. Boy, he was smart as the dickens, and, you know, he'd made high grades in college, and only he grew up out here 25 miles from here.
Shane was a part-time pastor. He coached sports teams at the high school, and many of the bank's clients were Shane's clients. People trusted him. Shane had served on the Kansas Bankers Association and testified before Congress about the importance of local banks in farming communities.
Oh, Shane was pretty impressive.
I think in his eyes, Shane Haynes had been the quarterback of the team for the last 12 years, and he was 12-0. The bank was making a good return for shareholders. The bank was maintaining its position in the market share, and we were growing. And so in that moment, there was a lot of emotions of, what do you mean something's wrong with the bank? We never have problems.
What was Shane doing? When Jim got hold of Shane said he was out of town. So it wasn't until he returned that weekend that he sat down with the board at the Tucker family farm.
He didn't strike me as overly concerned. He seemed fairly collected, and we just needed to continue doing what he was doing. It was kind of the overall tone of it.
Shane gave a confusing account of what he'd been up to. He said it had started with a quick loan to a loyal customer, but
it made little to no sense, much beyond the initial step.
Somehow, that loan had spun out of control. Good money had gone after bad. And now, according to Shane, the bank's money was locked up in a series of cryptocurrency investments overseas. Shane acknowledged that he'd made some mistakes, but he said he had a plan.
Shane, he was telling us we needed $19 million more.
The star quarterback, smart as a Dickens, wanted to spend more money on the problem. He said if the bank could just come up with another $19 million, all the money would be returned, plus profit. How this was going to happen was not exactly clear.
By the time he got here and met with us in this office, all state and federal authorities had been already notified. And he was aware of that. We made him aware that we had contacted them.
When his colleagues on the board made it clear to Shane how much trouble he might be in, it made no difference. He doubled down.
He was asking for us to basically agree to participate with additional funds that the bank did not have. And it just seemed like somebody needed to say, stop. Stop doing this. He should have stopped doing it 11 transactions ago.
Finally, they went around the table. Was the board prepared to proceed with Shane's plan? Jim was firmly opposed. Other members were just stunned and uncertain.
The final board member was asked their position. And he simply said, I'm just not comfortable betting the farm. Shane Haynes leaned across the table and said, David, I've already bet it for you.
Over the next few days, regulators turned up at the bank to pore over transaction records and conduct interviews. What exactly Shane had been up to was still unclear. The consequences were not.
And then, I think it was Wednesday of that week, we had a meeting. And I'll probably forever remember this, maybe as one of the worst things I've ever had to do. But I had to point to the line to some documents where my 92-year-old dad had to sign to agree to dissolve the charter of the bank that they created in 1984.
The bank collapsed.
And son of a gun, I never had anything hit me so hard in all my life.
And not knowing why, not knowing what had even happened.
Customer deposits had, at least, been federally insured. But the bank's shareholders were out millions of dollars. And these weren't Wall Street types. They were farmers, military veterans, and widowers who relied on the dividends to pay for their nursing homes and health insurance.
And then on that Friday, we knew it was interesting when we pulled into the parking lot, and there was a lot of vehicles around the property that were not local. Everything from, blacked out Suburbans with Florida license plates to moving van type things backed up and lined up, in a row around the property.
Teams of people were converging on the bank. Armed officers were outside the doors. Inside, movers were dismantling hardware and furniture.
You saw this just lost or almost panicked look by new employees, like, what in the world? I just moved my family here, I bought a home here. What is going on?
It wasn't until the end of the day, when markets were closed for the weekend, that employees got an answer. A state regulator revealed that Shane had become the victim of a scam. He was in so deep that he cleaned out his own bank, and when he was confronted by the board, he asked them for even more money. Now, all $47 million that he had taken were gone. I didn't go to Kansas because my editors suddenly became interested in small-town, true crime stories. Something very different, half a world away, led me to this tiny community in America's Midwest. And the collapse of this bank in Kansas was different, scarier, stranger, and bigger than any other case I'd ever heard about. Because online scams are scarier, stranger, and bigger than they've ever been. The days of emails filled with typos offering an obviously fake get-rich-quick scheme are gone. Shane Haynes had been ensnared by something far more sinister, a new and vast criminal industry conspiring to steal billions and billions of dollars from people around the world. It's an industry that now rivals the size of the illicit drug trade. When you start looking at modern scams, really looking, it's like looking up at that night sky in Kansas. You see these points of light, say a bank collapse in a small town. But the longer you look, the more points you see. They form clusters and constellations. Soon, you realise just how much is out there in the dark. A dystopian underground economy, one that is swallowing up not just banks, but entire cities and countries. In this series, I'm going to take you into that darkness. We'll travel around the world and back to meet shady businessmen, vicious mobsters, and fearless investigators. We'll hear from politicians, sometimes corrupt, sometimes heroic. We'll get to know the scammers themselves. And, of course, we'll try to figure out what exactly happened to Shane Haynes and the bank in Kansas. But my story starts with a simple question, the same one that Jim Tucker and the people of Elkhart were left with.
What got a hold of a guy that I perceived as being capable of making better decisions than that? What got a hold of him to wipe that out? If it was truly a scam, I struggle. It seemed like a well-rounded, all-American kind of guy, that had it together and had the world by the tail, seemingly. But yet, something changed him 180 the other way.
Jim Tucker tried asking investigators, what exactly happened to Shane? What was this scam?
Anytime I've asked people that I feel like are in the know, they generally give you an example or have given me an example. They'll send a link to an article of some situation that implies it was pig butchering.
By the time I turned up in Kansas, Shane Haynes was gone. He and his family had moved out of town. He'd pleaded guilty to 1 count of embezzlement by a bank officer for taking bank money and spending it on a scam. He was now awaiting sentencing. His lawyer had advised him not to speak to journalists ahead of his court appearance. So I went looking elsewhere for an explanation of how this could have happened to him. I started talking to other people who were victims of pig butchering scams. Many of these victims weren't the kind of people you might imagine would fall for a scam. The victims were relatively young and pretty savvy. They were tech workers, financial advisors, and police officers. And yes, CEOs like Shane Haynes. I found that their stories followed a particular pattern. They were less of a public spectacle than Shane's, but no less devastating personally. Even months afterwards, they struggled to piece together how they'd gotten sucked in, let alone explain what happened.